On March 17, 1943, inside a quiet wood-paneled office in Berlin, a German admiral stared at a single sheet of paper that seemed impossible to believe. It wasn't a blueprint for a new superweapon or a report on a hidden army. Instead, it described something even more alarming: a factory far across the Atlantic in the United States that was projected to build a 4-engine heavy bomber every 60 minutes. To Germany's high command, the idea was laughable. Surely this was American propaganda, a ridiculous claim meant to intimidate. But to the spies who had risked everything to deliver this intelligence, it was no joke. To them, the numbers meant only one thing: Germany's defeat was already written. This was the day they realized with chilling certainty that the war was lost. And yet, Adolf Hitler and his circle would refuse to believe it. Their denial of a single fact would help seal the fate of the Third Reich. At the center of this revelation was Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence. Unlike the fanatical ideologues around Hitler, Canaris was a professional from an older generation. A career naval officer, he valued hard facts and clear strategy over blind faith. His loyalty was to Germany, but his duty was to present the truth, even when it was ugly. The Abwehr was a vast intelligence network, with agents and informants spread across the world. In the early war years, their information had been crucial to Germany's blitzkrieg victories, helping the Wehrmacht outmaneuver its enemies. But by 1943, things were shifting. The crushing defeat at Stalingrad had shocked the nation. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet war machine was pushing back with unstoppable force. In North Africa, the once feared Afrika Korps under Erwin Rommel was being squeezed by American and British forces. The war was no longer a string of easy triumphs. It was turning into a slow, grinding struggle. Yet in Berlin, Hitler remained wrapped in a dangerous bubble of overconfidence. Surrounded by yes-men, he convinced himself that Germany's victory would come through sheer willpower. He believed German soldiers were superior, German science unbeatable, and German destiny unstoppable. Into this atmosphere of self-delusion, Canaris prepared to deliver facts that were colder than ice. Modern war was not just about soldiers or generals. It was about economies, production, and raw numbers. And those numbers showed Germany was about to be buried under an avalanche of industrial power it couldn't match.
The shocking intelligence didn't arrive in a single dramatic message. It built up gradually, piece by piece, from scattered reports. A German agent overheard a businessman returning from the United States talk about a factory so vast it seemed to have its own weather. A diplomat in Washington shared production goals that looked exaggerated, almost comically high. A Swedish engineer sent a coded report describing an aircraft assembly line that worked at the speed of automobile production. Individually, these stories could be dismissed, but as they accumulated in the Abwehr's headquarters, Canaris's analysts began to see the same alarming pattern. All of them pointed to one place: Willow Run, a massive industrial complex in Michigan. The reports claimed something unbelievable: that the Ford Motor Company was applying its automobile assembly techniques to the B-24 Liberator, a 4-engine heavy bomber. The goal wasn't one bomber a week, or even one a day. It was one bomber every single hour. To the German mind, this was absurd. A B-24 Liberator weighed 18 tons and contained more than 1.5 million individual parts. In Germany, a comparable bomber like the Heinkel 177 took weeks, sometimes months, to finish. The thought that Americans, dismissed in Nazi propaganda as an undisciplined, racially mixed nation, could build such a machine in 60 minutes wasn't just impossible, it was insulting. But Canaris and his officers did the math. If true, this meant 24 bombers a day, over 700 a month from just one factory. At the time, Germany's entire aircraft industry couldn't produce a fraction of that number. The reports were confirmed by multiple sources, even from Japanese naval attachés, who wrote home about America's rising production with open dread. The data was solid. The only question left was whether the Nazi leadership would accept it. While Berlin struggled to believe, in Michigan, the impossible was becoming real. On farmland outside Detroit, the Willow Run bomber plant was rising. It was the physical embodiment of President Roosevelt's promise that the United States would be the arsenal of democracy. Designed by industrial architect Albert Kahn, the main building was so enormous it was called the largest room in the history of man. It stretched more than half a mile long. To avoid paying property taxes in 2 counties, the assembly line even made a famous 90-degree turn, with bombers rotated on giant platforms, a quirk that workers nicknamed the tax turn. But the true revolution wasn't in size, it was in philosophy. Henry Ford and his production chief, Charles Sorensen, made a bold promise. They would build airplanes just like Ford had built Model T cars. The traditional aircraft industry mocked them. "You can't expect a blacksmith to make a watch overnight," one executive sneered. But Ford and Sorensen broke the B-24 into smaller sub-assemblies. Workers were trained for single, repetitive tasks. One person drilled holes, another riveted panels, making it possible for even new recruits to contribute. The plant ran an apprentice school that turned out thousands of trained workers each week, and the workforce itself was a direct contradiction to Nazi beliefs.
At its peak, 42,000 people worked at Willow Run. Nearly 1/3 were women, the famous Rosie the Riveters who wielded welding torches and rivet guns. One of them, Rose Will Monroe, would later become a real-life inspiration for the propaganda poster character. Around 9% of workers were African American, and about 3% were people with disabilities. Side by side, they labored in shifts 6 days a week, 24 hours a day, producing aircraft at a pace the Nazis insisted was impossible. The early days were chaotic. The plant was jokingly called Will It Run, but by late 1943, the system was working. Raw materials went in one end of the line, and an 18-ton B-24 Liberator rolled out the other, ready for combat. This wasn't propaganda, it was industrial warfare. America had unleashed a weapon Germany could not hope to match, the assembly line. Admiral Canaris now faced his greatest challenge, getting this reality past the wall of denial inside Hitler's headquarters. That wall had been built brick by the second most powerful man in Germany, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring. Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, had been a flamboyant World War I flying ace. By 1943, he was corrupt, vain, and obsessed with his own reputation. He saw himself as the ultimate authority on air power, and he was largely responsible for the myth that Germany's air force was unbeatable. So when Canaris presented the Abwehr's findings on Willow Run, Göring didn't react with concern. He laughed. He said, "Americans cannot build airplanes. They are good at refrigerators and razor blades." That single line perfectly summed up the Nazi worldview. To them, the United States was a consumer society of shopkeepers, lacking the discipline and martial spirit of the German people. The idea that such a country could mass-produce heavy bombers was, in Göring's mind, absurd. For Canaris, this was maddening. He had specifics, details of the mile-long assembly line, the specialized tools, and the vast scale of investment. The numbers were not speculation, they were verified facts. But Göring wouldn't hear it. Accepting the truth would mean admitting that his own Luftwaffe was about to be crushed. And so the report was buried under Göring's arrogance. The reality that could have reshaped German strategy was dismissed as propaganda. If Canaris couldn't convince Göring, there was still one last chance: take the facts directly to Adolf Hitler. But delivering bad news to the Führer was a perilous task.
Whether at the Berghof in the Alps or the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia, Hitler's headquarters were filled with paranoia. Briefings weren't about presenting facts, they were about reinforcing whatever Hitler already believed. To Hitler, the United States was a contradictory place. On the one hand, he despised it as a mongrel nation, weakened by racial diversity and supposedly controlled by Jewish financiers. On the other, he grudgingly respected its sheer size and resources. When shown the Willow Run figures, one bomber every hour, more than 650 a month, Hitler's reaction mirrored Göring's, but with more venom. He dismissed it all as Jewish propaganda. For him, the idea that such a nation could achieve this was a direct insult to his ideology. Albert Speer, Germany's armaments minister, later admitted in Allied interrogations that even if the Willow Run numbers were only half accurate, Germany's defeat was certain. But in 1943, saying such a thing in Hitler's presence was unthinkable. To contradict him was political suicide. And so, the confrontation never truly happened. Dogma defeated evidence. Canaris's warning was not just ignored, it was seen as weakness, even defeatism. In Hitler's mind, war was a test of blood and will, not of industry or logistics. One of the most important intelligence reports of the war, the truth gathered at great cost by German spies, was brushed aside, and with that, the fate of millions was sealed. The price of denial showed itself soon enough. What began as scattered raids turned into a thunderous wave of Allied bombers filling the skies over Germany. By late 1943 and into 1944, the prophecy of Willow Run had become reality. The U.S. 8th Air Force launched relentless daylight bombing campaigns, and at the heart of those missions were the B-24 Liberators rolling off the Michigan assembly line. In February 1944, the Allies began Big Week, a massive assault on Germany's aircraft industry. Thousands of bombers, many from Willow Run, struck factories across the Reich. The Luftwaffe scrambled to defend, but the battle was hopeless. Brave German pilots faced overwhelming odds. For every German fighter shot down, replacements were scarce. For every American bomber lost, 10 more were crossing the Atlantic. This was the war of numbers Admiral Canaris had warned about, a brutal war of attrition that Germany could not win. The Luftwaffe, once the pride of the Reich, was being destroyed. Cities Göring had boasted would never be bombed were reduced to rubble. Fuel became scarce as oil refineries were obliterated. Railways were torn apart. The German war machine, starved of fuel and resources, began to stall. One Luftwaffe general, disgusted by Göring's arrogance, wrote in his diary, "The Reichsmarschall lives in fantasy. Yesterday, 1,000 American bombers destroyed Linz. He still insists they cannot have built so many aircraft." The B-24 Liberators, the product of the largest factory floor in history, were dismantling the Reich piece by piece. For Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, the cost of speaking the truth was devastating. In Hitler's paranoid court, realism sounded like treason. His rivals in the SS saw the Abwehr as a nest of old aristocrats who lacked true Nazi fervor. They spied on him constantly, waiting for a mistake. His accurate warnings about American industry weren't just ignored, they were used against him, painted as proof that he was spreading enemy propaganda. But Canaris's quiet resistance went deeper. He was horrified by SS atrocities and secretly worked to shield members of the German resistance. He even helped protect Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the theologian who opposed the regime. Behind the scenes, Canaris also maneuvered to keep Spain out of the Axis, a move that cost Hitler strategically. After the failed July 20, 1944 plot to assassinate Hitler, the Gestapo uncovered the Abwehr's hidden networks. Canaris was arrested. His private diaries revealed his true opposition to the regime. On April 9, 1945, just weeks before Germany's surrender, Hitler gave the order for his execution. At Flossenbürg concentration camp, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris was stripped naked and strangled with piano wire. A humiliating and brutal death for a man who had tried to save Germany from itself. He had seen the future with absolute clarity, delivered the message, and paid for it with his life. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, the numbers proved just how right Canaris had been. The intelligence report from 1943 had not only been accurate, it had actually underestimated America's capacity. At its peak in 1944, the Willow Run plant was producing a B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. By the time the line shut down, Ford had built 6,972 complete B-24 Liberators at Willow Run and delivered another 1,893 knockdown kits for assembly elsewhere. Think about that. A single American factory produced more four-engine heavy bombers than the entire German aircraft industry managed during the whole war. Across all U.S. factories, America built over 18,400 B-24 Liberators, making it the most produced heavy bomber in history. From 1940 to 1945, the United States manufactured more than 300,000 military aircraft. Germany, in the same period, managed about 94,000 combat aircraft. Industrialist William S. Knudsen summed it up perfectly. "We won because we smothered the enemy in an avalanche of production, the likes of which he had never seen nor dreamed possible."
Germany's failure wasn't a failure of espionage. The Abwehr spies had done their job. They got the intelligence. The real failure was in acceptance. The Nazi leadership simply couldn't process facts that clashed with their ideology. They were blinded by their own propaganda, convinced that America's diverse, democratic society could never compete with what they called the master race. In the end, they weren't defeated by a secret weapon. They were defeated by math, by the cold, simple reality of factories running day and night, powered by men and women of every background working together. The story of Willow Run is more than just a fascinating footnote of World War II. It's a powerful reminder. On March 17, 1943, the truth arrived in Berlin, and the men in power refused to believe it. That denial sealed the Reich's fate. Willow Run stands as a monument to everything Nazism despised, the strength of a free and diverse society. On its factory floor, women, immigrants, African Americans, and people with disabilities all worked side by side. Together, they achieved what the Nazi elite said was impossible. History shows us that the strongest walls are not made of concrete or steel. They are built in the mind, walls of arrogance, prejudice, and denial. When reality came crashing in, those walls collapsed, and with them, the Third Reich. The legacy of Willow Run is clear. The power of unity, freedom, and hard work can achieve the impossible. And when ideology ignores facts, it paves the road to disaster.